Okay, let's continue with our next panel. And the topic is transforming the built environment, energy efficient and connected future. The panelists who will share their insights with us today are Simon Phelan, founder and CEO at Hometree, Dr. Jörg Überla, co-founder and CEO at 42 Watt, Margarita Skarkou, principal at 2150, and Germán Peralta, CEO and co-founder at Nido. Moderating this debate, we have today with us Tomas Kemtys, general partner at Contrarian Ventures. Welcome to you all. The stage is yours whenever you want. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So we can start. Thanks for listening and being in the room for this. So let me do a quick intro of the guys, but I'll do it a bit differently because you can read about them online and on LinkedIn. So ask them to get me one fun or interesting fact about them. So I'll introduce them by this. So we'll start with Jörg down there. He's co-founder of 42 Watt, and for 10 years before he was an investor with Wellington Partners. As a former investor at Wellington, he declined to invest in Skype, one of the worst investment decisions he's ever made.
So thanks a lot, Thomas, for that intro. Yeah. I think I'll have to be a bit more careful what I tell you when we go out in the bar.
Was this the end of your investment career?
No, it was very early. It was very early, actually, but it's a good question. This was the early 2000s, and a good business angel friend of ours introduced us to the deal. And those were the days when, yeah, mobile phones were there, but everyone was mostly using the desk phone. And he told me that there's this startup that offers free phone calls through the computer, and basically no one had a headset or anything like that. And I said, who needs that, right? I mean, phone calls are so cheap anyway. But the numbers were going like this, and I said, we're not interested. So one of my many bad investment decisions.
Not the worst.
But I learned something.
Yeah.
Trust the numbers. When things are going like this, it means something, even if there's no payment behind it. Yeah.
It's good. Okay, we have Margarita from 2150, big urban tech sustainability fund based in London and Copenhagen and investing across Europe and US. Before that, she was at Barclays, principal investment team, also I think covering a lot of sustainability space. So a fun fact or interesting fact about her is that she grew up on a Greek island that is known or not so known for breaking the Guinness Book of Records of most fries ever served in one evening at the local annual potato festival. So if everyone's keen on a potato festival, Margarita is here to...
It's a true story.
Yeah.
If anyone likes potatoes.
I'm Irish. I do.
Cool. Then we got Germán, co-founder of Nido and CEO of Nido, started 1.5 years ago. And before that, he helped build Joker in Latin America, which was one of the first grocery delivery unicorns. Fun fact, so he's an engineer by training, but he's also took 1 year off to become a professional chef. In case this doesn't work, then you can always switch. And then we got Simon, famous Simon, of the founder and CEO of Hometree, who's been doing that for the last 9 years. Interesting fact, maybe not fun. Married to a lady from Bilbao. He got married here in Bilbao 2 years ago. Plus, it was originally a VC who introduced him to his wife, and he was also an investor in Hometree. So whenever he's choosing VCs, who will be next investor has a very high threshold, whether introduction to your wife or something of that importance. So picking VCs is quite a big one. So awesome to have you guys here. Let's dig into the topic.
Thomas, before you start with that, you have to start with a fun fact about
me.
you.
And I'm moderating. I have a pass on this one. So first question to the founders. So for me, transforming the built environment it's sort of balancing act between a few things. One is really destroying what's already been built, and then sort of the carbon requirements related to that. Really the speed of transition in this kind of immovable static asset class as real estate. plus really the ability to make an impact not only sort of locally, but more sort of on a global scale. So if you guys could, maybe start with Jörg, sort of introduce what do you guys do at the company and how you address these issues or things to move forward.
Yeah, if you look at the problem in a German perspective, you have about 16 million homeowners, private homeowners, and some of them start to think about, well, it would be nice to reduce energy costs or to get less dependent on external providers or to become climate neutral with their building. And they have two big problems. Number one is there's overwhelming complexity from the cellar to the roof, from PV to battery and heat pumps. Even nerdy owners can't take the decision by themselves. And that wouldn't be a problem by itself, because normally you would go for advice from independent experts. In this case, the experts are the craftsmen, but they're by no means independent. They always try to sell you their solution, of course. And since you're not talking about a €50 investment for a new sweatshirt, but 50,000 investment in your building, people end up doing nothing. So that's the way we look at the market and the problem. And what we do is we try to make it as simple as possible for the owners to go through the whole process. Now, regarding your question, regarding speed or whether you have to destroy some things first, I think the majority of the energy in the buildings is used for heating. So that's the most important thing that you should change. And for that, you don't necessarily need to change the building infrastructure, except for the heating component. But for us, really, it's a customer-by-customer decision. And there's some buildings where you can't start by putting in a heat pump because they're too inefficient and you have to do something on the building first. But with most of the buildings, you can immediately start with a heat pump and PV. And in that sense, that's what's driving our decision, you know, speed versus do you have to destroy something first? Thanks, be our view. Yeah.
Yeah, I think on my side, I obviously agree. I mean, we do heat pumps. And with regards to whether we need to destroy something or not, I think time is already doing it for us. There's over 60 million heat boilers that need to be changed in Europe either way. So people need to make the decision. Either you change it for a gas boiler or you change it for a heat pump. And I think the regulators are doing a decent job at trying to prohibit fossil fuel in homes, and people are going to have to electrify. With regards to how to make like a sustainable impact that can go beyond only one city, one country, what we're trying to do is to play with the incumbents. So there's the craftsman, there's the machine manufacturers, there's the different energy players that have already a large customer base. And what we've done is we've built software for both sides of the equation, right? So our tools allow people that are trying to sell heat pumps, which are usually in Spain, the PV players and construction companies, but also new incumbents as the utility players as well, to properly, sell a heat pump to the customer with, enough information so they can use our algorithm to very quickly give them an idea of how much their job is going to cost, how much labor is supposed to be part of it, and what are the internal components which are also part of the broader work itself. And then the installers, they're already there, and there are not a lot of them given the amount of work that needs to be done, but they're super inefficient because they need to figure things out on the field. So what we do is we give them the tools so they can not have to think about designing, not have to think about procuring, not have to think about selling, and they only have to think about installing, which we help them make that job easier. And I think given that the built environment is a 3D world, is scalable with regards that you need to take into consideration different markets and so on. But it is a physical space, which is going to look the same here in France, in the UK, or whatever, right?
Super. So look, I think this question is at the essence of what Hometree is our business strategy, which is we also believe that homes will electrify, and we believe that, long run, we're moving to a world where heating is powered by primarily heat pumps, PV, batteries. But as we've seen, there are different business models, and customers need to go on a different journey. Some customers are early adopters that are willing to take a heat pump out very early in, without knowing much about the technology. Like we've seen in the electrification of transportation, some customers have range anxiety, and there are similar, there's similar concerns when it comes to heating. There's a lot, in the UK where I'm based, there's been a lot of scaremongering. The gas lobby is very strong, and I think unfortunately there's been a lot of negative press about heat pumps. And so the way we've, it's actually core to our strategy of how we've tackled that. We do have quite recently set up a renewable installation division where we're doing a buy and build of regionally successful heat pump, solar, battery installation businesses. We have a financing arm that offers leases and loans for homeowners to help them finance that. But actually our largest business, and the business we started in, is today the 4th largest provider of a specialty insurance product in the UK called Home Emergency Insurance. So we have over 100,000 homes that we provide an insurance product for, where we protect the traditional heating in their home so they can take out just an entry-level product that covers their boiler all the way up to their appliances, plumbing, drains, home electrics. And it's a regulated financial product, but actually the claims experience is that we've got a network. We've got the 2nd largest network in the UK of engineers. So we've got 5,000 engineers that we can send out and dispatch typically within 24 hours when the homeowner has a breakdown. And I guess our belief and the reason that we've gone into this market is right now there was only between 50 to 60,000 heat pump installs in the UK last year. There was 1.7 million gas boiler replacements. The government has a target for 600,000 by 2028, but unfortunately the market's not growing as fast as we'd like. And so we've seen multiple kind of direct-to-consumer, venture-backed installation businesses. But as we know, the challenge for many of them is the cost to acquire those leads for heat pumps or solar. It just gets more and more expensive and competitive because there's no real barriers. So by building a base of captive customers whose heating assets we're protecting, maintaining over a 5, 6, 7-year period, when that asset comes to the point where it needs to be replaced, assuming we've done a good job on the service and maintenance side, typically we're finding that we're the first point of call they're coming to for replacing their heating system. And of course, what that means is throughout that life cycle journey, we can be educating that customer on the rationale for upgrading to a heat pump, and hopefully making them make that CapEx cycle happen one time earlier than it might otherwise, locking in another gas boiler for another 10 years. And of course, if you can offer financing at that point, they might go from paying £20 a month on an insurance policy to £50, £60 a month for their new asset with the same level of protection included. So, we believe that, you can't just snap your fingers and expect that customers are everyone get there and it's going to be a tidal wave of demand for heat pumps. You have to work with homeowners and go on a transition to try and get them comfortable with the technology and give them the ancillary benefits like financing and insurance that give them the peace of mind to make this transition.
Amazing, thank you. Margarita, you're one of the largest specialized urban tech investors in Europe, at least for sure, and probably globally. How do you look at this built environment thesis, like in a broad spectrum? Do you guys split it on sort of the most acute areas, the most painful areas, the most emission-driven areas, and sort of what do you look for in the startups?
Yeah, so maybe to share a little bit more about how we kind of define urban tech and how we think about that as 2150, and then I'll share a little bit more detail. But so we really think about this as backing companies and technologies that can help to make cities more sustainable and resilient. I think the resilience angle is quite interesting because that's what enables us to also go, beyond the city boundaries in particular and think about things such as biodiversity, adaptation, resources flowing in and out of cities. I think one of the reasons that we decided to really focus the thesis for the first fund and now the second fund that we're beginning to deploy on the urban environment is that about 80% of global populations live in cities. And I think it's about 90% of GDP that is produced from cities. It is also as a result where majority of emissions come from. And I think a lot of materials are consumed in cities, so everything kind of flows through a city. I think the built environment is very, very central to that, by which we mean buildings primarily, but also the infrastructure around buildings. I think there, what's interesting is that 25% of global emissions come from buildings and the built environment, but yet when you look at the funding that has historically been directed towards that, particularly from a venture perspective, it's much, much lower. So there's a real opportunity there, I think, on the one hand to have an impact, on the other hand to make investments. And I think as the kind of founders on the panel have all expressed, that there's a strong timing element to that. And I think right now is a really exciting time to be investing into the space. I think how we break that down is probably in a couple of different ways. So when we talk about buildings, we think about the kind of the operational footprint. So everything that I think you guys have talked about relates to that. So really that's about kind of the energy consumption within a building and how to optimize that. I think there's different approaches depending on the kind of buildings. But the other angle that we're also very focused on is actually embodied carbon. So in Europe, obviously, it's pretty built up region of the world. A lot of the opportunities are within the retrofit space. But there's many parts of the world where cities are being built at an incredibly fast rate. And a lot of the materials that we've traditionally used, cement, concrete, steel, they're extraordinarily detrimental. And so we really look at both of those. And I think depending on kind of where in the world you're focusing on and what the use cases are, there's different approaches.
Do you find more exciting things in Europe or abroad in the US? And what's the difference between maybe the founder profile?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say there's differences in terms of the founder profile. I think, we aim to back great teams as well as great companies. You can find great talent everywhere in the world. I think the problems that people are trying to solve often are related more to kind of their own lived experience. And so in Europe, I think, for sure, there's a lot of really exciting retrofit businesses, 3 good examples on the panel, and there's a big market for it as well. I think incentives are aligned. I think in other parts of the world, we definitely see, like in the US in particular, where there's still a lot of construction happening, there's still a lot of kind of new build, we do see a lot of interesting technologies as well on that side. But I'd say it's pretty agnostic in terms of kind of geographies, because these are big problems, and most businesses that raise capital from VC investors, they have a global aspiration in any case. So actually where you're kind of based and building is not always where you plan to scale. So.
Cool. Makes sense. So again, the question to the founders. So you all guys are at different profiles of maturity of the stages of your company. So maybe we'll start with Jörg. So obviously a lot of things could be better when building business, a lot of bottlenecks. But if you had a magic wand and you could sort of erase one thing or make one thing bigger or better, what would be sort of, we're talking like better regulations, like much more financing to the business, or like consumer behavior should change, like what Simon mentioned a little bit. It's a long journey to educate them. What would it be?
Yeah, I think on the 3 things you mentioned, capital and government and consumer behavior, capital for us at the moment isn't the bottleneck. Thanks to Contrarian and other investors, we have a pretty broad base, and we will go to Series A at some point, but that's not at the moment our most pressing concern. On the government side, however, things could be so much better, and I'm not talking about subsidy. I'm mostly talking about communication. I mean, it's a simple fact that, like you have also expressed, most of the scientific people and community tell you that if you don't have district heating, heat pump is the only way you can go in terms of CO2 neutral heating of the buildings. And it's a simple fact. But if you talk to 100 German homeowners, I think maybe 5 see it that way. And the other, and Simon, you mentioned it, are confused. The gas lobby is saying, oh, it doesn't work, or if it's really cold, you won't get warm, or whatever. And that's just a communication thing. And in Germany, the government is horrible at communicating that. And that would be the biggest thing that even wouldn't cost much money. It would just require a bit more professional messaging to get that right. And the third, on the consumer behavior, and Simon, I think you've been in this business for a long time, that would be extremely nice if that changed. But at the same time, I think for a lot of our customers, it's the 3rd biggest investment they make. One is buy a house, second is buy a car, and the third at some point is invest 50 or 60 or 80K to retrofit your building. So it's, in my view, unrealistic that you could time compress that to to a month, no matter how good you are digitally or so forth, because it's such an important decision. So that would be nice, but it's completely unrealistic. Government, better communication would be doable and would have an equally large impact. That's our view. Yeah.
And just zooming in a little bit, just super short on this, there was quite a big, regulation change, subsidy change in Germany at the back of last year. How did you digest that sort of news shock to not only you, to big ecosystem, to many manufacturers who wanted to invest, and this miscommunication, again, mis-expectations from the government? So would you rather be regulation neutral, or you think regulation should be driving some sort of?
Yeah. First, what happened is, like most European governments, we have subsidies for a certain type of energetic renovation, and the German government had the smart idea to recycle some 60 billion, which was originally earmarked for the pandemic fund, which wasn't used, to a climate and transformation fund, and that sounded like a smart idea. But the Constitutional Court decided that this was unconstitutional, and within a matter of 10 days, they basically had to stop all the subsidy programs. And a lot of people were, of course, impacted by that. And this is not, for the fourth largest economy, that's extremely embarrassing, and there's a lot of other things that are embarrassing, but we can talk about that at another point. So that was the situation, and for us, it has always been our ambition to try and build something that is not dependent on subsidies. So like you say, regulation neutral. It's a lot harder in the beginning, because the subsidy is easy money, you can take it and blah, blah, blah. But we think it's not a good way to build a large and sustainable company. So we try to continue our focus on not depending on that. Yeah. Cool. And most investors share that view, although it's a bit more painful in the beginning.
Herman, maybe from your perspective, in terms of bottlenecks or things that would really accelerate for your company.
I guess, from a magic wand perspective, obviously the government would be the first thing I would try to move. I'm a big believer in carbon tax, which I think is not taking effect as fast as it should. I also think there's very quick things that can be done that are not as troublesome as subsidies, because subsidies are complex. Obviously, the implementation of it is quite inefficient. But just removing VAT from climate efficient hardware, removing VAT from electricity if you prove that you can reduce your consumption, is also impactful. And I think that could definitely speed up the transition from the user perspective.
Cool, thanks.
Just very quickly to chip in on that, because I mean, in the UK, this has been very topical, and obviously I think as a kind of group of founders, a lot of focus is on consumer, but within, obviously, commercial real estate, that's a huge, huge sector, and there's a lot of levers. And I don't know if this has been changed, I don't think so, but it's been very kind of debated topic in the UK. But for example, if you throw a building down and rebuild, there's a lot of, you have VAT exemption or much lower VAT versus renovating. And so the incentives are completely skewed to do that rather than actually retrofit buildings. So we see it in the middle of Oxford Street in London, you see these huge buildings coming down and massive buildings being rebuilt, which again, when we think about the embodied carbon, often that's actually more material even than the energy consumption. And so I think there are definitely kind of simple things that are within kind of government's control that can make a huge difference, because at the end of the time, I think whether you're talking about consumer or business, there's a kind of net zero imperative, but I think cost is still the key driver. And so where you can kind of change things that can be transformational, and we have seen that in different sort of sectors.
Interesting, yeah. And Simon, you went through 9 years of your journey. What were the sort of bottlenecks in the beginning when scaling business, and now you raised tens of millions of dollars of capital, and what they became now? And we're sort of in general interested in your journey to see what were the main issues 8-9 years ago, how consumers looked at it, and how they look at the transition now.
Yeah, I guess, today is an interesting, I've been at the Growth Meets Capital event upstairs with kind of growth equity guys. If you roll back to when I started the business in 2015, and me going into venture capitalists in London talking about boilers and heating, most people thought I think I was a bit crazy. It was super early. There was Thermondo in Germany, but a lot of the European bigger companies today hadn't really been built. So I would say if you roll back 8-9 years, capital was a harder challenge, whereas today, like Jörg said, we've raised 85 million of equity. We've recently raised a big debt facility with a large institutional investor, and we've also raised a securitization facility. So, capital hasn't been the challenge across the different parts of the climate financing stack. I think the challenge, candidly, in this space has been finding a business model that had the right unit economics that could scale in a way to tens, hundreds of millions of pounds of revenues and deliver, be it venture or private equity style returns. Because I think a lot of businesses, a lot of early investors were SaaS and technology type investors that were candidly thinking in the same way. And fundamentally, I think for the investors to invest in this space, like 2150 and Inven, who've invested in Hometree, it does require a fundamentally different kind of mindset to a pure software investment kind of thesis. You need to think about debt capital, you need to think about infra capital. These are, we've got 5,000 engineers going into thousands, some days tens of thousands of homes every day. These are different businesses. And so, I think cracking the model and feeling that the actual economics of our model was going to scale is really important. Look, we've always taken a view that we can hopefully in some way influence consumer behavior, but we're not going to change consumer behavior. Consumer behavior will change as the market, adopts. But like Jörg said, our biggest bottleneck probably today, candidly, would be trying to get more government support. In the UK, there has been a huge amount of confusion. The UK has promoted hydrogen for residential heating for a long time. They've run trial after trial after trial, again, which candidly is the gas lobby. I think the gas lobby in the UK is probably the strongest in the world. I think it's north of 90-something% of UK homes are still heated by gas. And so, of course, there's the incentive to think, well, we'll just replace the gas with another fuel. But really, those trials have just petered out. And so we've got mixed messaging. When I started in this category, there was very high subsidies for solar in the UK. They all got removed. They killed the solar market for a couple of years. We were originally starting our business around the solar market, and we pivoted into heating because the solar market got killed for 3-4 years in the UK. So, I think that really for us, thankfully, like Jörg has mentioned, we've built a subsidy-free business, a business that can scale with what we hope is a sustainable and strong business model. But it's taken us a long time to figure out, because I don't think direct-to-consumer installs is a model that's going to return great returns for private equity and venture type investors. I think one needs to think a couple of layers deeper around how you build high margin recurring revenues, and that's a journey that we've been on for 8-9 years that we think hopefully we've got an interesting shot at now.
Amazing, thank you. So good segue to a question to Margarita, which was probably going to be the last question of the panel. So Simon mentioned VCs love the SaaS type of businesses, quick returns, quick scaling. How do you guys look at, urban tech? You can invest in those type of businesses, but also there's, breakthrough type of innovation, maybe new type of materials, new type of installation that you can do, and maybe new builds. Do you guys try to strike a balance within your portfolio of getting best of both worlds, or it's more like, hey, I need to focus on these SaaS type things?
Yeah, so we definitely kind of invest across both hardware and software, and we do increasingly also invest into kind of more deep tech hardware, because I think even within hardware there's obviously different models. I think what Simon was saying in terms of the different kind of parts of the capital stack, right, and the different products, and just his description of how that's changed since he started the business and today, is I'd say what really enables investors like us and gives us the confidence that actually backing, hardware, kind of more CapEx intensive businesses at the kind of early growth stage, which is where we typically play around kind of Series A, Series B, can return those amounts. So that's, I think, one of the aspects. It's almost like, if you think about the input and what it takes to actually take a business from kind of seed Series A to scale from a kind of growth perspective, these businesses just inevitably will need more capital. I think if you're expecting to fund hundreds of millions of CapEx through equity, that clearly doesn't work. It doesn't work for the founders either, because obviously you're kind of taking on more and more dilution, and there's a point beyond which it probably just doesn't make sense to continue. And so the input of capital, I think, and the way that that's changed and the kind of blended finance models that we're seeing and more, on that side, more and more government support. I mean, at the moment, particularly in the US, and a plug, we have a panel tomorrow that I'm moderating on this topic. So if anyone wants to attend a climate finance panel. But so that's the one side of it. The other side, obviously, is as a venture capital investor, you're always thinking about the exit from the point at which you invest. You know, for us, and traditionally, particularly with software, you know, the exit is an IPO, and there's investors that are seasoned, very, very experienced investors, software investors, that basically, unless they believe the company can IPO, they won't even back it at a seed stage. We think about that really differently, and I think realistically for most kind of climate tech investors that look at industrial companies that look at kind of hardware or blended sort of service models as Simon was describing, you know, private equity is probably the most likely outcome. And there's trends there that support this kind of from a macro perspective, so more and more private capital, more and more companies staying private for longer, you know, bigger and bigger kind of private equity funds. And then I think specifically within climate, you know, there's more and more private equity funds specifically for climate. And so I think it's a kind of function of those two things, as well as the market and obviously the demand and all of the traditional things that you would look for that make us very confident that we can still achieve the same kinds of returns, because I think from an absolute perspective, from a numbers perspective, you know, we are still targeting the kind of traditional VC returns, but the landscape is very different now to what it was sort of 10 years ago.
Cool.
And on that, I'm very optimistic. So.
And if there are founders in the room and they wanted to get some capital from 2150, what would you say, you know, you need from them? What do you look for? A couple of things.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say kind of maybe to try and keep it kind of brief, three things probably. One is thematically it needs to be within our thesis. Realistically, what that means, the only thing we right now don't invest into is anything that's purely agriculture or agri-tech focused. Everything else, we kind of find a way to fit it within the urban tech thesis. But we need to be able to quantify the impact, and that can be different things. It's not just carbon, but I think, you know, we take that quite seriously. We're an Article 9 fund, and so if it's not obvious, then we won't even kind of spend the time digging deeper. I think that's the first aspect. The second one is just the stage. So we are a kind of multi-stage fund. We invest from sort of late seed Series B, and we also selectively make some growth investments. But I'd say kind of Series A and B is really the sweet spot. If something's kind of pre-seed idea, we won't look at it. And then the third, I think, is really, you know, what we've talked about. I think, you know, we're still looking for great teams. We're still looking for ideally sort of early signs of product market fit. If it's deep tech, definitely kind of signs of tech risk being somewhat mitigated and a huge market. So not too much.
Not too much. How much money would you give them if that clicked all the boxes?
Depends.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks guys for being here, for doing this. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone.